There's a strange silence that fills a room when someone has already decided your fate. A quiet hum of inevitability that you can feel under your skin before a single word is spoken. That morning, I felt it the moment I stepped into Ironvale Technologies' glass tower, the same building I had walked into for 12 years without a single missed day. My name is Rena Voss. I am 39 years old, born and raised in Salem, Oregon. And for over a decade, I was the lead systems architect at one of the most formidable defense engineering companies in the country. My work had been my pride, my anchor, and in many ways, my identity. I had been the mind behind the intricate web of code and design that powered Aegis Sentinel, a flagship defense system valued at $520 million. But on that particular morning, the air seemed heavier, pressing down on my chest as though it already knew the words I was about to hear. The elevator ride to my floor was slower than usual, or maybe it only felt that way because my heart was pounding in my ears. People greeted me with polite nods but avoided eye contact, as if looking at me too long might pull them into the undertow of whatever was coming. I noticed the whispers by the coffee station, the way a junior analyst quickly shifted his eyes to the floor when I passed. At precisely 9:11 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from the executive assistant, "The boardroom, now." I had only been in that room a handful of times, and every visit had meant one of two things. Either we had landed a monumental contract, or we were facing a catastrophic problem. I had no illusions about which one this was going to be. I walked down the long hallway toward the executive wing, my heels echoing off the marble like a countdown clock. My mind was still and strangely sharp. I had anticipated this moment for months. The pattern had been building, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. My name had begun to vanish from design briefs, my innovations suddenly credited to others, and strategic meetings held without my knowledge. The final confirmation had been the arrival of Gareth Holloway, the new CEO with a perfect smile and an aversion to people he could not easily control. I had known almost instantly that I would be on his list, but he did not know that I was already prepared. When I reached the boardroom door, I paused for a fraction of a second, my hand on the cold metal handle. Inside, I knew, was a decision they believed was theirs to make. They thought they would strip me of my title, escort me out, and lock me out of the very system I had spent years creating. But there was something they had not considered, something they could not imagine. The storm in the air was not just theirs, it was mine too, and it had been quietly building for far longer than they realized. The room was dim, the blinds drawn against the late morning sun, and at the head of the long polished table sat Gareth, his hands folded in front of him, a picture of controlled authority. To his right was Trevor Dane, the opportunist who had been shadowing me for over a year, studying my designs and parroting my language in meetings as if it were his own. His smirk was faint, but deliberate, like he was watching a performance he had helped script. Gareth gestured toward the seat opposite him. "Rena, please sit." His voice was calm, almost warm, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. This was not a conversation. It was an execution. In that moment, my mind split into two streams. One part listened to his carefully crafted speech about structural changes and reallocating resources. The other was already tracking the seconds on the clock because I knew exactly what would happen the moment my company login was disabled. Every polite phrase he uttered was a veil over the truth, that he saw no need for the person who had built the foundation of his company's crown jewel. He thought skill could be replaced with salesmanship, that the architect could be discarded once the building stood. What he did not understand was that the architect had the keys, and she was about to change the locks. I remember the faint hum of the air conditioner, the way my fingertips rested lightly on the polished table, and the strange calm that washed over me. This was the final act of a play I had been directing for months, and I was the only one who knew the ending. In 15 minutes, the $520 million system they believed they owned would no longer be theirs. It would be mine, on paper, in law, and beyond their reach forever. And the best part was, they were the ones who had given me the power to take it. Gareth leaned back in his chair as if he had all the time in the world, his hands clasped loosely in front of him like a man about to deliver a sermon rather than a sentence. His suit was perfectly tailored, the kind of expensive charcoal fabric that never wrinkled, even when its owner's conscience should. He smiled in that polished way people do when they believe they are being kind, though every syllable was dipped in condescension. "Raina," he began, drawing my name out as if savoring it before tossing it away. "You have been with Ironvale a long time, and your contributions are appreciated. But the direction of this company is changing. We need leaders who can sell the vision, not just build it." There it was. 5 seconds of false praise followed by the carefully rehearsed knife twist. Trevor, sitting just to Gareth's right, shifted slightly in his chair. His posture was the picture of smug restraint, but his eyes betrayed him. They were bright with the thrill of finally seeing the person he had spent months undermining get pushed off the stage. This was his moment as much as Gareth's. He had positioned himself as the bridge between engineering and leadership, translating my innovations into language Gareth understood while carefully removing my name from every success. And now, here he was, at the table where they would erase me completely, watching with the hunger of a man certain he would be wearing my title by the end of the week. I kept my face still, my breathing even. I knew that reacting now would only feed the performance Gareth was putting on. This was theater for him, an audience of 2, maybe 3, if you counted the HR representative hovering silently in the corner with a folder clutched to her chest. I watched his lips move as he spoke about organizational efficiency and fresh perspectives, corporate phrases designed to sound like evolution when they really meant execution. Every time he said "we," I mentally replaced it with "I," because there was no committee behind this decision. This was his power play, and he wanted me to know it. What Gareth did not know was that every step leading to this moment had been anticipated. The slow stripping of my authority, the public crediting of Trevor for work he could not have dreamed up on his own, the closed-door meetings that excluded me. I had seen the pattern forming from the very first stitch, and instead of fighting it openly, I had let them believe their strategy was working. I had given them the space to get comfortable, to underestimate me, to think I was too buried in code to understand politics. Meanwhile, the foundation of my plan had been quietly poured, solid and unshakable. He slid a document across the table, a formal termination notice dressed in corporate politeness, with a severance package figure that might have impressed someone who had not already prepared for war. I let my eyes skim it without picking up the pen he had conveniently placed beside it. The pen was silver, sleek, probably custom engraved, a prop in his little performance. I met his gaze and let the silence stretch just long enough for him to sense there was something in it he could not read. That was my first small victory of the morning. "Rena," he said again, this time with that half-smile people use when they think they are softening a blow. "This is the best path forward for both you and the company." The arrogance in his voice was almost intoxicating. He truly believed that by dismissing me, he was ending my relevance. But all I could think was how little time he had left before that certainty turned to panic. In exactly 15 minutes, his company would lose not only me, but the very heart of the Aegis Sentinel system. And the best part, it would happen without me lifting a single finger in that room. Everything was already in motion. He was simply too blind to see it. The first time I noticed my name missing from a technical report, I told myself it was a clerical oversight. After all, in a company the size of Ironvale Technologies, mistakes happened, and I was not the type to jump to conclusions. But then it happened again, this time on a major design brief that outlined a key breakthrough in the Aegis Sentinel's adaptive targeting module, an algorithm I had personally spent months perfecting. In its place, the credit line now read, Lead Developer, Trevor Dane. That was when I understood it was not an accident. It was a strategy. The erasure was not sudden, and that was what made it dangerous. It started with small exclusions, meetings rescheduled at the last minute without me, emails I was inexplicably left out of, project notes that no longer bore my initials. When I raised the issue with my former department head, he offered a dismissive shrug and told me to focus on the big picture. What he really meant was that the decision had already been made, and my protests would only make me more of a target. I learned quickly that silence would be my shield, at least for the time being. Trevor, for his part, played his role with the precision of a parasite. He was polite to my face, even deferential at times, asking me to explain things so he could present them more clearly to leadership. In hindsight, I see those moments for what they were: extraction missions. He was collecting my words, my ideas, my hard-earned innovations, and repackaging them as his own in rooms I was no longer invited into. Gareth, new to the company and hungry for allies he could mold, saw Trevor as the perfect bridge between the technical and the executive worlds. I was an architect. Trevor was a salesman. And in Gareth's mind, salesmanship always won. It was not that I lacked ambition. I simply believed that results spoke louder than self-promotion. For 12 years, that had been true. My work had landed contracts, secured government partnerships, and pushed Ironvale ahead of every competitor in our field. But in the new order Gareth was building, quiet excellence was invisible, and loyalty was currency. I had neither the inclination nor the stomach to flatter a man who thought charm outweighed substance. Still, I did not confront them. Not yet. I understood the power rarely shifted in a single dramatic blow. It moved slowly, like a tide creeping up the shore, erasing footprints one by one until there was no trace you had ever walked there. They believed they were erasing me. What they did not realize was that I was already drawing a new map, one where they would not just lose me, but the very system they were trying to claim as their own. Every change they made, every piece of credit they stripped from my name, became another reason to tighten my plan. The more invisible they made me in their eyes, the more dangerous I became in reality. Gareth saw himself as a master strategist. Trevor saw himself as my successor. I saw them both as unwitting players in a game they did not even know had begun. And by the time they realized it, the rules and the victory would already be mine. I have always believed that the most effective defense is the one no one sees coming. So when the first signs of my erasure appeared, I did not waste my energy on public battles I knew I could not win. Instead, I went silent, at least on the surface. Behind the scenes, I was building something far more powerful than a complaint or a confrontation. I began documenting everything, archived versions of design schematics with embedded metadata showing my authorship, server logs that tracked my development hours down to the second, internal memos where I outlined technical solutions long before they appeared in official presentations under Trevor's name. Every file was encrypted, mirrored, and stored off-site in a place Ironvale could never reach. I also began paying closer attention to the fine print that passed through Gareth's desk. Leadership thrived on assuming technical reports were beneath their concern, so long as they were neatly formatted and free of typos. That assumption became my weapon. I started embedding subtle clauses in certain progress reports. Clauses that, if signed, would carry legal implications far beyond what they realized. It was tedious work, crafting them in a way that blended seamlessly with the engineering jargon. But it was worth every late night I spent at my desk after the others had gone home. The final piece of my plan required expertise outside my own field, and that is when I reached out to Marla Finch, a 52-year-old intellectual property attorney with a reputation for dismantling corporate power plays. Marla had the kind of sharp mind that could cut steel, and she did not flinch when I told her exactly what I wanted. A legal framework that would secure my claim to Aegis Sentinel in a way that could not be undone, even if Ironvale tried to bury me. She studied the documentation I had collected, then smiled the kind of slow, deliberate smile you only see from someone who knows they are holding the winning hand. "We can do this," she said, "but once it starts, there is no going back." I did not need to think twice. Together, we designed a trigger, an automated sequence that would activate the moment my employee credentials were revoked. The system would file a patent naming me as the sole inventor of Aegis Sentinel, purge the proprietary source code from Ironvale's servers, and deploy a legal lock that would prevent the company from recreating any part of the system without my explicit approval. It was elegant, surgical, and entirely within the boundaries of the law. The most delicate step was planting the final document, a routine compliance report Gareth would have to sign to greenlight the last development phase. Hidden deep within its technical appendix was the clause that acknowledged my sole authorship and rights to the system. To anyone skimming, it looked like just another block of specifications. To me, it was the keystone. Without it, the whole structure of my plan would collapse. With it, Ironvale's crown jewel would legally belong to me. When Gareth finally signed it, he barely glanced at the pages. He handed it back with a distracted "looks fine," already moving on to his next meeting. That moment was the quietest victory I had ever experienced, and the most dangerous one for them. They thought I was playing defense, but I had just moved into offense. The only thing left to do now was wait, and I have never been afraid of waiting. The beauty of Gareth's arrogance was that it made him careless. He loved the performance of leadership, the speeches, the investor calls, the photographs in trade magazines. But when it came to the tedious backbone of the company's operations, he relied on people like me to handle the details. That blind spot was exactly where I built my trap. The final systems integration report looked exactly like every other thick, dull compliance document I had ever sent his way. Densely packed diagrams, performance benchmarks, and the kind of technical language that made non-engineers' eyes glaze over. It was the perfect camouflage. Deep in the appendix, nestled between code optimization notes and redundant power load calculations, sat the clause that mattered most. On the surface, it read like a standard intellectual property attribution. Dry legalese no one outside of a law office would bother reading twice, but to someone who knew how to interpret it, the meaning was crystal clear. Gareth's signature would formally acknowledge me, and me alone, as the inventor and rights holder of the Aegis Sentinel system. No committees, no team contributions, just one name on the legal record, mine. When the day came to deliver it, I carried the report into his office with the same calm efficiency I had shown for years. He was on the phone, leaning back in his chair, talking to a potential client about our groundbreaking proprietary system. I almost laughed at the word "our," but I kept my expression neutral. I placed the folder in front of him, flipping it open to the signature page like I had done countless times before. Without breaking his conversation, he picked up his silver pen, the same one he would later use to sign my termination, and scrawled his name across the line. The moment the ink hit paper, the trap was sprung. I left the office without a word, my pulse steady. That was the thing about planning at this level. Victory did not come with fireworks. It came quietly, like a seed being planted in rich soil, its potential invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. Gareth thought he had just checked a box in the project's timeline. He had no idea that in doing so, he had handed me the legal equivalent of the company's beating heart. Later that night, I scanned the signed page and sent a copy to Marla. Her reply was short but electric. "We are locked in." From that point forward, everything was a matter of timing. The patent filing had been prepared down to the last detail. The purge sequence for the source code sat ready in a secure location, armed and waiting for the single trigger that would set it in motion: my termination. All I had to do now was let Gareth and Trevor believe they were the hunters. The irony was almost poetic. They thought they were setting the stage for my exit, stripping me of credit, power, and position. But the moment Gareth signed that report, the roles shifted without him knowing. He had become the author of his own undoing. And soon, in a way that would be impossible for him to reverse, he would realize that by trying to erase me, he had made me untouchable. The final phase of my plan was as clean and precise as a clock mechanism. Every piece had been set in place months earlier, hidden in plain sight among the thousands of lines of code and endless streams of company paperwork. All it needed was a single event to bring it to life. That event came the moment Gareth gave the silent nod to the HR representative in the boardroom. I saw her shift slightly, pressing a button on the slim tablet in her lap. It was the signal for IT to revoke my credentials. And right there, at 9:26 a.m., the gears began to turn. In that instant, the system I had built quietly came alive. The patent application for Aegis Sentinel, prepared, reviewed, and ready to submit, was transmitted to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, listing me as the sole inventor and rights holder. At the exact same time, an automated purge command traveled through Ironvale's internal network, reaching every server that had ever housed my code. Within seconds, the proprietary source files were replaced by corrupted shells, empty structures that looked intact but could not function. They would open them and see the familiar framework, but the soul of the system would be gone forever. The third step was the most satisfying. The legal lock that Marla and I had designed engaged itself like a vault door slamming shut. It bound the intellectual property to me under a chain of protection so tight that even Ironvale's own legal team would need years to untangle them, if they ever could. And all of this happened without a single keystroke from me in that moment. I simply sat in my chair, listening to Gareth's voice as he droned on about transitioning responsibilities, knowing that his empire was already bleeding from the inside. I did not look at my phone, but I felt it vibrate in my pocket twice in quick succession. Those vibrations were not messages. They were confirmations. Marla had programmed the system to send them the moment each critical step was completed. First vibration, patent filed. Second, code purge complete. A lifetime of work, secured in my name and beyond the company's grasp, all in less than the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The power in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt. For months they had made me feel small, expendable, invisible. Now, with the plan fully in motion, I was reminded of who I truly was. The architect, the strategist, the one who saw 3 moves ahead while they congratulated themselves for winning the first. They thought this was the day they erased me. In reality, it was the day they set me free, with their $520 million system tucked neatly into my possession. I folded my hands on the table, met Gareth's eyes, and gave him the faintest smile. He mistook it for resignation. He had no idea it was victory. The meeting ended with Gareth standing, extending his hand like some benevolent king, sending a loyal subject into honorable exile. I rose slowly, not out of reluctance, but to savor the moment. When my palm met his, the first flicker of confusion crossed his face, barely visible, gone in a heartbeat, but I caught it. Perhaps it was the steadiness in my grip, or the fact that I did not look away. He expected to see defeat in my eyes. Instead, he found something else, something he could not name. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed a 3rd time in my pocket. That was Marla's personal confirmation, the one reserved for when every piece of the plan had executed perfectly. In that exact second, I knew the boardroom behind me was already a crime scene, though they had not yet discovered the body. The patent was mine. The code was gone. The legal walls were unbreachable. Ironvale Technologies still looked whole from the outside, but at its core, it was hollow. Walking down the corridor felt different now. My heels no longer echoed like a countdown to my removal. They sounded like a drumbeat of ownership. I passed the same junior analyst who had avoided my gaze earlier. This time, I met his eyes and gave a faint nod. He would not understand it until later, but I was no longer the one being escorted out of the story. I was the one holding the pen that would write its ending. By the time I reached my office, my monitor had already gone dark, my access revoked. To anyone else, that blank screen would signal the end. For me, it was the final green light. The purge had been absolute. Their engineering servers now held nothing but placeholders. Beautifully organized, utterly useless placeholders. Even if they tried to rebuild, the absence of my proprietary encryption keys meant they would be working blind for years, perhaps decades. I sat for a moment in my chair, letting the weight of it settle in. 12 years of service dismissed in 15 minutes. And in those same 15 minutes, I had taken with me the one thing they could never replace. That was not luck. That was design. Theirs was the kind of leadership that believed control came from titles, offices, and contracts. Mine came from foresight, precision, and the patience to wait until the exact second the blade would cut clean. When I finally gathered my things, I did not rush. I placed my personal items into a small box, each movement deliberate, knowing that somewhere behind closed doors, Gareth and Trevor were about to discover that their crown jewel was gone. And when that moment came, I wanted to be long gone from the building, not hiding, not running, but walking out into the daylight with the quiet confidence of someone who had just changed the rules of the game forever. I had barely made it to the parking garage when the first ripples began. My phone lit up with a message from Marla. "It has started." In my mind, I could already picture the scene unfolding in Ironvale's war room, screens flashing red, engineers frantically clicking through corrupted files. The dawning realization that the source code they depended on had dissolved into nothing but hollow frameworks. Somewhere, Gareth would be demanding answers in that calm but deadly tone of his, and Trevor would be sweating through his suit jacket, insisting there had to be a backup somewhere. There was not. I had made sure of that months ago. By noon, my inbox, now tied to a personal server, was flooded with forwarded news alerts. A government liaison was demanding clarification on a potential breach of contractual deliverables. Investor calls were going unanswered. An internal memo had leaked, revealing that Gareth himself had signed off on the clause transferring Aegis Sentinel's rights to me. The phrasing was legal dynamite, and it was already being picked apart on defense industry forums. One headline read, Ironvale's 520 meters defense project now belongs to former employee. Another was even less forgiving. CEO hands away company's flagship system. On paper. Stock prices began to slide before the market even closed. It was not a dramatic crash, more like a slow bleed, the kind that makes shareholders panic because it signals something deeper is wrong. The press swarmed, eager for a scandal that combined corporate arrogance with legal brilliance. I stayed silent. No statements, no interviews. Silence has weight, and in moments like that, it says more than any prepared press release ever could. From what I later heard, Gareth's first instinct was to call in Ironvale's legal team, but they quickly realized the problem was not reversible. My patent was already processed and filed. The purge of their servers had been executed through a perfectly legal chain of ownership rights that I now held exclusively. They could not even attempt to rebuild without violating intellectual property laws. My laws. The irony was exquisite. They had built their careers on stripping others of power, and now they were learning what it felt like to have the ground pulled out from under them. And Trevor? Word reached me through former colleagues that he had been all but exiled from the executive floor within 48 hours. Gareth might not have admitted it out loud, but Trevor's constant assurances that everything was under control had turned him into the perfect scapegoat. The man who had spent a year erasing my name from reports now found his own name disappearing from the company's official materials. I imagine the chaos continued well into the night, but by then I was nowhere near Ironvale's tower. I was sitting in my own apartment, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker. I had played my part perfectly, and the collapse was theirs alone to manage. What they called an implosion, I called justice, and justice in this case was both silent and absolute. The morning after Ironvale's implosion made headlines, my phone began buzzing before sunrise. At first, I thought it was more reporters looking for a statement, but it was not. These were calls from companies I had once admired from a distance, organizations that had passed me over in the past because Ironvale's shadow was too long. Now they were eager to talk, eager to meet the woman who had not only designed Aegis Sentinel, but had managed to secure it entirely for herself without stepping outside the law. The offers came fast and loud, signing bonuses that made my old salary look like pocket change, promises of full creative control, and stock options that would set me up for life. But I had no intention of jumping into another corporate cage, no matter how gilded it appeared. I wanted more than a job. I wanted freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when you control not just your work, but the terms under which it exists. So I turned down most of the offers and began quiet discussions with Castrol Dynamics, a firm Gareth had once dismissed as small-time dreamers. I had always liked their engineers. They valued precision, innovation, and integrity over flashy press releases. And unlike Ironvale, they understood the worth of the people behind the product. Within weeks, we struck a deal. I would work with Castrol on a new generation of defense systems, but Aegis Sentinel would remain mine. I also began licensing it strategically to 3 major defense firms, each contract written with an ironclad clause. Ironvale Technologies was permanently barred from using, copying, or modifying any part of the system. The royalty streams alone would exceed my Ironvale salary in a single quarter, and they would keep flowing long after Gareth's name was forgotten. The shift in power was intoxicating, but not because of the money. Though I will admit, the money was satisfying. What thrilled me most was the knowledge that I was no longer at the mercy of someone else's vision. For years, I had been told to think about the big picture by men who thought the big picture was theirs to paint. Now I was the one holding the canvas. Ironvale, meanwhile, kept stumbling. Without Aegis Sentinel, they had nothing to offer the government contracts they had promised to deliver on. Investors were pulling out. Rumors swirled that Gareth was quietly seeking a buyer before the entire company collapsed. As for Trevor, the last I heard, he was back to working mid-level project management at a small subcontractor. Still talking big, still dreaming small. I had no interest in going back to gloat. At least, not yet. There is a time for quiet victory, and there is a time to make your presence known. My moment for the latter was coming, and when it arrived, it would not be subtle. They had spent months trying to erase my name. Soon I would make sure it was carved where they could never ignore it again. 6 months after Gareth shook my hand and thought he had erased me, I walked back through the glass doors of Ironvale Technologies. Not as an employee, not as someone seeking a meeting, but as a guest of the annual Defense Innovations Conference. The irony was almost theatrical. The conference was being hosted inside Ironvale's own headquarters because it was the only space in the city large enough to accommodate the event. The lobby looked the same as it had the day I left, but the energy was different. The polished confidence that once radiated from the staff had been replaced by something tighter, more cautious, like people living in a house they knew might be foreclosed at any moment. My name was on the conference program in bold lettering. Keynote speaker, Rena Voss, lead architect of Aegis Sentinel. There was no mention of Ironvale in that title, no asterisk, no shared credit. When I stepped onto the stage that afternoon, I was greeted by applause from industry leaders, engineers, and government officials, many of whom had followed the headlines when the patent battle became public record. Gareth sat near the back, stiff as a statue, trying to mask his expression with polite interest. Trevor was nowhere to be seen. I delivered my keynote with precision, speaking about innovation, ethical engineering, and the importance of protecting the creators behind groundbreaking work. I never mentioned Ironvale by name, but I did not need to. Every example, every lesson I shared, carried the shadow of what they had tried to do to me and what it had cost them. By the time I stepped off stage, I knew the point had been made. Before leaving, I took a short detour to the Wall of Innovation, a long stretch of glass and steel in the executive wing, where Ironvale displayed the names and faces of its top contributors throughout the years. My portrait had once hung there, removed quietly in the weeks leading to my dismissal. In its place was an empty slot, the absence of a name framed by the others around it. I reached into my bag and pulled out my original nameplate, polished, flawless, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. With a soft click, I slid it back into place. It fit perfectly. Then I walked to Gareth's office, where his assistant, looking far too nervous, told me he was unavailable. I left a small envelope on his desk, addressed in my own handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in clean, even letters. Always read what you sign. No threats, no explanations, no need for more. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt no rush of triumph, no burning need to look back. What I had taken from them was not just a system or a patent. It was the illusion of control they had built their careers on. And what I had gained was something they could never reclaim, the freedom to decide where my work lived, who it served, and how my name would be remembered. Some victories are loud. Mine was quiet, deliberate and permanent. And in the world I came from, that is the kind of victory that lasts forever.